So it looks like nobody here yet. So I gotta wait for somebody to appear.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, more or less. And yours?
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah, I can't complain.
Okay. Let's see. So you wanted to write the specs for GraphQL again?
Yeah, because I didn't have time to do that yet. So let's become hosts.
And I was thinking about that this API for making commits is
Yeah.
probably like not enough. It's probably just doing the commit, but it doesn't push the branch. I'm not sure. Like
Well,
it can create a commit on top of the branch, but it cannot like push the commits that were before, probably.
but if you are making an API call to create a commit, then the commit is going to happen on the remote branch.
Yes, but the uh, the branch will not be synchronized. So you get the contents from the top of the main branch, then
Yeah.
create a commit from that content, and then apply it to the fork branch, and this is where the conflict appears.
Huh.
So the target branch is used to create the source branch is used to create the diff for the commit,
Yeah.
and then it probably apply to the branch where there is a different content. Otherwise, I don't see why it fails. And like today's morning, I tried to edit the documentation, and the same problem like appeared. So it's pretty
Huh.
bad for the user experience. And
Yeah.
it's also the problem with the how to say that with the web editor, which is Visual Code based,
Yeah.
because when I open the file in that editor, it opens my branch. So I go to yeah, and there is no way to synchronize it because there is no gate there.
Mm. Oh, because so if your branch is out of date, maybe you don't have the exact code to make the changes.
Yeah, right. So, well, the problem is that my branch is outdated, so I don't see the
Yeah.
content that I wanted to edit. So this is the
Yeah.
problem. So that was kind of weird. Um, and then I thought that maybe there is just no code to synchronize the branch. So first, uh, the edit needs to be made two-step process. First, we need to push the master on the original repo to the fork and custom branch, and then apply commit on top of custom branch. So this is how it's
Mm.
probably going to work.
Okay, I see. But have you tried opening an issue and pinging someone from the, I guess, source code team?
No.
And because I am pretty sure that any doubt that you have, they will be able to solve it
How
and
to
give
ping?
you like if you found this issue, if you create an issue for that and you ping the PM or some engineer from the source code group, I guess
Okay.
they might be able to give you some answers.
Mm. All right. Yeah, so I probably will do this because last time I remember that there was like 4 or like 5 levels of indirection and still no clear API call to create a commit. So I
Yeah.
don't believe in my powers to do anything about it. So,
Yeah, that's why, because if you ask the right group, they know the source code, so they can definitely give you some pointers on where to make changes or what to check or stuff like that.
yeah.
And maybe they never encountered this issue because they have access to the repo, so they basically don't use this workflow.
Yes, and that's a shame because this workflow needs to be tested thoroughly, because for many open source repositories, it's essential to have a clear way for people to fix mistakes in the documentation without bringing up the merge conflicts and the stuff.
Yeah.
So, well, let's see. Okay, so
Yeah.
I probably will do this today's later, so we can look at the tests if you need
Yeah.
another pair of eyes. Finally,
Okay.
I have
Huh?
no idea how GraphQL works.
Oh, well, okay. Let's
Well,
first start.
I understand that there is some backend that parses the query and then translates it to the backend whatever logic it has, and yeah, that's it. But uh, for me, it's so complicated.
It's actually easier than what you think it is, because I do prefer it to use GraphQL or to develop GraphQL rather than creating REST APIs, because it's more flexible. So, well, my internet connection is kind of slow, so let's hope that. Come on. Wow, this is very slow. Still loading GitLab.com.
But how it can be slow if the Zoom works okay?
Yeah, that's the same question that I'm having, but I also have Google that it's slow, so it's not GitLab. So let's try a different thing. I might disappear for a second. Okay, I'm back. While I'm connected to my hotspot, I'm going to restart my router. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay. That's much better. Let's go to my MR. Okay. Okay, I'll share my screen so that we can have a look. Can you see my screen?
Just a minute. Yes.
Okay. So just to give you an overview, basically the GraphQL controller has you can do kind of two things with GraphQL. You can use mutations to make changes to the data, and that's basically like a post call or a put or a patch call to the REST API. Or the other thing that you can do is fetch data, so basically making queries. To make a query on the backend, you define a resolver, and let's go to have a look.
Is that the Apollo library on the backend?
Apollo is the front-end library that we use on the to make query to the backend. The
And that's basically the only one, right?
that I don't know if they for some period of time they used Vue.x. I'm not really sure if that was related to GraphQL or not, but I know that right now the front end new stuff written for the front end, it's all using the Apollo client. And for the backend, I'm not really sure what library they're using, but yeah, Apollo is for the front end. So basically, when you make a query, you specify. Let's see an example. The view bar, the zoom bar is always in the middle. So if we run a query, for example, to get the time logs, and for these time logs, we want to fetch the ID. Okay, so basically, this is the entry point for the query, and it's defined on the where was it used? Issue user interface. Yeah, this should be this one, I guess. Now. Basically, on you expose that you have a time logs query, and you have to connect that to the resolver to that's going to be used to basically resolve the data for that query. The resolver is exposing arguments, and these are basically used to, for example, the username to provide more filtering options or pagination or stuff like that. and it exposes the return type, that in this case we are returning a time log connection type, because we can return an array of time logs. So it's a connection type, and the connection type inside has the time log connection type. It returns all the objects, and you can also provide additional fields that are computed. For example, the total span time is something that I can query outside of the nodes, because it's going to be the sum of all the time spent on the time logs that the fetch is going to return. And so basically, what we had in Origin, we had this time logs resolver that was doing all the things, like actually making the calls to fetch the data from the database. But that's not the pattern that we should use, because the resolver should be combined with a finder service. So the finder service is should expose all the finding mechanism that the resolver then can use to fetch the data from the database. And that's also needed because when you open an MR and you are making changes to the finders, that's going to go through a database review, while a change to the resolver is not necessarily going through the database review. And that's a kind of part of the reason why I am splitting the time logs resolver to its own finder. The main reason why I'm doing this, though, is that we have an issue on the current finder that basically it's going to fetch all the time logs based on the filters that you provide, but it's not checking for permissions before returning the data to the GraphQL endpoint. So basically the permissions are checked, but only after the resolver has completed. So the resolver gets the full set of time logs. It computes the additional fields. For example, on the connection type, the total spend time is going to use all the objects returned, and these objects are not going to be filtered because the filter is happening at a later stage on the built-in on the GitLab GraphQL. They basically built in an additional level of security to be sure to not expose stuff that shouldn't be exposed. And that's an issue because things like total spend time and also the pagination is not using the right values. Like if I make a query for the time logs for my user, I can see a lot of total spend time, but maybe for stuff that I, for example, don't have access anymore, and my total spend time will be wrong, and also the pagination will be wrong, because, for example, if all my items are filtered out at a later stage, I'm still going to see the next page or previous page buttons on the front end, because the GraphQL is telling me you have pagination, you have enough data to use pagination. But in reality, we don't have all that data because it has been filtered out on a later stage.
So you want to swap the filtering, make
exactly
filtering.
What we have to do is, make the use the filters, but also apply the permission checks before sending the objects to the later stage. So we have the right set of objects to compute the total spend time or the pagination.
All right. So you want to make tests about the filtered out entries?
Not yet, because I am still in the process of separating the resolver from the finder. So basically, I think that all the permission checks logic will go in the finder, because the timelogs resolver should only call the finder service. The finder service should return the list of timelogs already filtered by the search arguments or the permissions.
I not quite get the resolver and finder separation, like in concepts. So for comparison with the REST service, when something hits the REST backend, there is something that accepts the parameters and then something that translates the parameters into the query to the database.
Yes.
What happens with the resolver and finder? What is the role of the resolver and finder here?
It's basically the same thing. Think of the finder as a service that can be shared between the resolver and the REST API. So basically, if we build the logic to perform the search and permission checks and all of the stuff to get a list of time logs, we build the finder service that we can then use on a REST API or on a GraphQL resolver.
Right. So finder is the service that is independent of
Basically,
GraphQL.
Yeah.
All right. So it's not connected in any way, and it's for what? For locating the objects in database?
I didn't really get what you
So you said that finder service is something, it's a reusable component
Yeah.
that other components can like call.
Yes.
But what is the role of the finder? What does it do?
It basically has all the logic. For example, this is the finder that I wrote. Basically, I extracted the logic that should have been in a finder to an actual finder. So basically, we have an issuable and a list of params. The issuable is used for cases where you want to get the time logs for a specific issue or of a specific NMR and stuff like that. And params, for example, has the search arguments like the username, the start and end time that you want to get the time logs for, and or the sorting. So the finder gets all the data needed to prepare the queries, and then makes the calls to basically get the data from the queries and make all the additional checks for the permissions and stuff like that.
So basically, it's a Rails component, but for API.
I guess so. Yeah.
Because it's the same, like parse the parameters, then query the database, but return the array or not like HTML. So that's it. But the finder is just for filtering the database records, right? So it's like replacement of active record.
It's not really a replacement. It's something built on top of that. Because with the finder you could perform all the additional checks like permissions that you wouldn't do maybe on the active record and do on a higher level.
Okay, so the separation between finder and resolver is just GitLab specific, right?
I guess so. I mean, it's it makes sense to have this separation because you can build one service and then you can use it on REST APIs, on GraphQL APIs, or other places of the code base. So basically, you don't have to rewrite the logic to fetch in this case, the time logs every time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I got it. So this is the project that just allows you to make another abstraction above the active record that allows to filter by certain fields,
Mhm.
find objects by linked objects.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then Resolver is the service that not sure what it does.
The resolver is, in this case, is just exposing the arguments, uh, basically to where is it? It exposes the arguments that you can pass here to
Okay.
filter, like the start date and date, and takes them and prepares the params to pass down to the Finder service.
Okay. So just processing the params and that's it.
Yeah, basically, yes. Um, so I wanted to give it a try to use ChatGPT to create the specs. I guess we could use Duo. Create test file. Is it going to work? Context, yeah. You please provide a name. Oh, okay. Create test file for almost. As a starting point. Okay. Well, anyway, we already have the time log resolver spec because we already had a resolver, so the spec for that was already existing. So we actually have to write the spec file for the Finder. Let's see.
There is no coverage statistics, right?
For what?
For like looking which parts are already being covered by the spec and which are needs.
I guess there are the statistics, but I don't know where to find them because we do run under coverage on the MRs, but I really never understood how to get the data out when running a spec to make sure to check the coverage of the file itself. So
Well, the coverage is an artifact, so if there is a GitLab extension, it could probably fetch the artifacts and then draw the coverage.
yeah, but I don't know how to run. I guess you could run our spec and telling it to also print out the coverage.
Yes, probably there is a comment in Makefile to do this.
Yeah. I forgot to add the Okay, so let's have a look at another one just to have an idea. This and try to time works. Finder. It's not Team Funny, but I don't remember what it is. I will check later. So we could have a look at the time of resolvers back. Yeah, team planning. Okay. Let's try another. It's a good starting point. Yeah, basically it's creating a spec to to test whether the filters are provided or not. But yeah, let's have a look at the resolver spec to a bit of setup.
Forgot to include the helpers. It's probably not gonna work.
The GraphQL helpers.
Yeah.
We're no, these GraphQL helpers have methods like where is it? The to 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 basically make a GraphQL call, but in this case we are testing the finder, so we're not making GraphQL calls. We are actually making the call to the execute function method of the finder. So we are going to need a few time logs.
But those let it be helpers where they are defined.
Sorry?
These let it be like merge request time log 1, time log 2. This like these are like fixtures. Are
Uh,
they global or somewhere?
yeah, basically when you run the spec, it's going to create a user and set up the variable current user with the value of that specific user, so you can basically pass these variables um, to the finder in this case, and you can make assertion on whether or not it's returning the right stuff or not.
But it's these objects are not defined anywhere. If there is a create user, it passes the user to the create function. How does it know that it should be like the user type or merge request type with all the fields?
Yeah, this is using the fixtures inside somewhere factories, I guess.
All right, so create calls a factory.
Yeah, it calls a factory, and you can provide, for example, this creates a merge request, and you can provide a source project where to create that merge request. So these are all factory methods that we created that we can use to set up the test, basically.
I see. And these are global, so they're imported automatically. Or or the create
Uh,
method is imported and then it looks for the fixtures.
Yeah,
factories.
well, it's creating the, for example, create user is creating the user record on the test database. So if you make a query after calling create user, you're going to actually see that user from the database. So like
Interesting.
this, we create pre-time logs, and they're actually going to be created inside of the database. So when we run the Finder specs, it's going to actually do the SQL queries and we can make sure that the queries are returning the right data.
Nice.
So let's we can do subject. I always forgot. Okay, new current user. No, we have issuable and params. Okay. Execute.
What does this align to?
This is creating basically when then we will run. Let's search. So I can give you an example. Okay. So we define this subject that's basically it's like declaring a variable called subject that's instantiating the described class, passing down issuable and params, and calling the execute method. So basically, on the subject object, we will see the result of the execute method call. So when we create one test, we can, for example, in here do expect a subject to be equal to a given array of time logs. Let's actually try to describe execute with an example. It's easier to understand.
So the subject will be executed for every test?
Yeah, the subject will be executed for every, if we do it like this, it's going to, where is it? Like this, it's going to call the subject. So basically make the call to the execute in our case and check the result. If we had expect subject, expect subject, it would make 3 calls. We
Okay,
can
and every time it will create new object, right?
it won't create, for example, the same time log every time. It would
Wow.
only make the call to the execute all the times that you reference the subject.
Okay.
So text issuable is new. Text. Is empty. This is the base case that basically we want to. We don't need this for now. No, we do need the project because it's used by this one, and we need the issue. Okay, the project, the issue, the merge request, the 3 time logs that are connected to the issue and the merge request. The project, we moved it up above. And I don't think we'll need those. So basically now we can, it returns all the time logs, and this was pretty good. So it returns all the time logs. We make a call to basically say expect the subject, which is the call to the execute, to
So
return.
it's called to time logs finder, then class new, so it instantiates the time logs finder
Yes,
with the issuable and params, but let issuable nil and params empty. So it takes those params and then it creates an object called execute.
exactly. So it's using subject is a shorthand for
Mhm.
this.
All right. Okay. Got it.
So when we run this now, one sec. Oh, oh, yeah. It's back. And I actually updated GDK before, but I never run a spec, so it's going to compile. So we can create we can do other examples. So when issuable is not nil. So we do this and set the issuable to issue. When the params are empty, well, they're empty by default. This should contain only time log 1 and 2. And we have, can we create time logs for other, for issue, for merge request? Could create oh, it ran. Method missing. Undefined local variable method group. Where are we using group? Oh, in here. Okay. So we actually do need the group as well. Okay. So these two tests are passing, so it's working. And now we basically have to build all the different scenarios possible. So providing, we have to provide some params. So context and params as username. Trans username timelog one dot username. The thing is that we are all creating all the time logs for the same user. So we have to fix that. Create issue. I guess we can create. I think I actually did already something like that. Issue and request with a user. Okay, create time log, and we can provide the user. Issue user. We can use another username here. That almost. And then so we need to create the current user. Okay, so current user has time log 1 and time log 3 when not providing an issuable. Turns all time logs created by the user. We should have time log 1 and 3. Instead, when we do provide the issuable and we provide the issue, so we only have time log 1. Okay, that's good. So how many cases do I have to cover? User group, project, and time. And ground house. Oops. And then we also have all the combinations of providing a group and a user and stuff like that. But I'm not
But
really sure if
that's
we.
why, yeah,
Yeah.
right. The problem with these tests is that they kind of include everything, but it's also doesn't test really the logic, because there is combination of parameters if somebody like specified them. I mean, it could take like a lot of time for the tests with no like real benefit.
It depends on how, because in this case, the tests are always going, like all the filters that you provide are only going to narrow down the set of possible results. So I think that even if we don't cover all the different combinations, like you provide a user and a group, or a user and a project, or a group and a project, and stuff like that. I think we are good anyway, because yeah, the filters are only going to narrow down the set of available time logs.
Yeah, right. So they just combination of filters, but I like the feeling that before the GraphQL, it was just an ordinary queries, and nobody needs to, cover them with tests. And right now, like having to cover when the tests, I kind of understand that there might be like places where it's easy to make a mistake, but well,
Yeah, well, it's not something coming from GraphQL, because I guess we also have a REST API for this, and we would also have to cover all the different filter scenarios. So it's not really GraphQL related.
no, I see.
Let's see, group is used to create this project, and this issue created out of this project. Yeah, there's some setup needed in here. And I'm actually out of time for today, unfortunately. But at
But
least,
it was, yeah, at least there is now a base for everything that needs to be written.
yeah, at least now I have started, so I just need to complete it. Like it really boils down to create the right setup of objects that we can then write in the test. Then it's basically easy, because you just need to provide, like this case, when param has a group, okay, set up the params with the group and make sure that we are getting only the time logs for object coming from that group. That's once I have set up all the time logs in the right way that we can test all the different scenarios, then writing the tests, it's not really going to be that huge. It's not really going to be time consuming.
Well, yes, not time consuming for the writing the test, but maybe time consuming for the execution of the test. But well, let's see, like not covering them also, like there is a chance that there might be something important missing. So
Yeah, well, it also the time for running the spec also depends on how you set up the spec. For example, let it be. I'm not an expert on this, but I know that you can have let it be. It's going to basically create one variable, like create the merge request in memory on the database only once when you set up the test. Whilst if you use let, every time that you run a spec, for example, in here, we are, every time that we call subject, we are going to evaluate issuable, for example. And every time issuable is evaluated, if inside of this spec, it's the first time that we evaluate it, it's going to create the issuable. So going up the chain, creating the issuables means creating the issue, which means creating the project, which means creating the group, and so on. So if you use let it be, even when we call subject, it's going to check issuable because it's using a let, so we can change it on every spec. But it's not going to create the issue every time because it has already created it.
all
This
right.
way you can optimize things like creating a group or creating a project takes some bit of time that you can avoid.
And if my task modifies the project that was created with let it be, it will be reset
You
when the
can
next test starts.
you can override. For example, if inside a test you need that project to be different, uh, I'm I
Or like
think
I need some properties in this project to be altered for that specific test, but not affect other tests.
uh, that works, but I'm not really sure how, because I can't really give you an answer to that.
Well, okay, no problem.
Because I know that, for example, if you do let and exclamation mark, it's going to override, for example, the let it be.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I'm not really sure how it's going to revert the variable to be the original one for another spec, for example. I'm sure that's documented on our spec, but I don't know it.
I would ask ChatGPT if I was sure it doesn't give the bad answers, but it can give bad answers.
Well, we can try. What is the difference between let it be and let in our spec?
There was some neural network, I don't remember who made it, which gave references to where it's got its answers from. And that was useful, but I don't remember who was that. Maybe it was a Google search results, maybe it was some other search engine. Uh, I'm not sure which one. It was some search engine that was
Mhm.
really useful.
Oh, it answered. The main difference between let it be and let in our spec is let it be creates an object one time for examples. Oh, in the same context. Okay. So for example, this is a context and this is another context.
Hmm.
This makes it faster than let, which creates a new object for every example. So I guess the examples are the it, while the context is a collection of examples, because we can have multiple it statements on a single context. Let it be objects should be treated as immutable. Modifying them can cause issues. So that
Hmm.
basically answers your questions.
All right. Yeah. So they are not isolated by default.
Oh, okay. But there is also let it be with reload provides a balance. It creates the object once, like let it be, but reloads it before each example, like let. Okay. So in summary,
Okay.
use let it be for immutable fixtures that apply to all examples in a context. Use let to create disposable instances that can be modified. Okay. Use let it be with reload if you need to reload an instance before each example. So let it be with reload would create the object on the database. You could modify it in memory, and the next example would reload it from the database.
All right. So makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. We learn something new every day.
From ChatGPT now, more and more.
Now, this is actually GitLab Duo, not ChatGPT. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's Vertex AI they're using probably, or no, they're using the not unsure how to say. Well, those guys who are making ethical AI, so they probably using the Google Vertex uh, AI APIs, but the neural network is from those kind of good guys with ethical AI framework.
Yeah.
Not don't remember how to call it.
Yeah, I didn't document too much on that. I just tried to use it. So, yeah.
I'm
Well,
using
anyway.
several of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like
Anyway.
your time is over.
Yeah, I'm at time for today because I have lunch and then go back to the office. So thanks a lot for joining me and for having a look together.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks for like explaining a lot of stuff that was quite interesting.
oh, always available for that if I know something. Okay,
Yeah.
so see you next time then.
Maybe, who knows?
Yeah, okay. Bye bye.
So, yeah, then bye.
Bye.